what's going on with the case of Venezuela. And it seems that Europeans have some sort of difference when it comes to the Latin America. And with the Trump administration, it seems that they're not the United. At least we've learned that the United Kingdom is not willing to share intelligence with the United States. And here is what Marco Rubio said in response to the policy of Europe.
The European Union gets to determine what international law is. No, they certainly don't get to determine is how the United States defends its national security. The United States is under attack from organized criminal narco-terrorists in our hemisphere, and the president is responding in the defense of our country. I do find it interesting that all these countries want us to send, and supply, for example, nuclear-capable Tomahawk missiles to defend Europe. But when the United States positions aircraft carriers in our hemisphere where we live, somehow that's a problem. So I would say that the United States is, and this president has made very clear, his job is to protect the United States from threats against the United States, and that is what he's doing in this operation.
Yeah. Ambassador, who's attacking the United States? Because as though he's talking about attack on the United States, as though Venezuela is attacking.
No, of course, Venezuela is not attacking the United States. It's essentially been under attack by the United States for a quarter century in an effort to overthrow first Hugo Chavez Frias and then his successor, Nicolas Maduro. Of course, what the European objection is that this is a gross violation of international law. These attacks on fishermen and laborers and other people whose names we don't even know, and there's been no explanation for this. I think it is, however, very, very significant that the UK, which has been, since World War II, has been very much a close partner of the United States in intelligence sharing on all sorts of fronts, should now suspend sharing intelligence on the Caribbean, that is, on movements in the Caribbean. And of course, it was followed almost immediately by President Petro in Colombia, also suspending narcotics in intelligence sharing with the United States. I think the statement that Marco Rubio made shows that he's very loyal to Donald Trump, but it has no resemblance to reality. There's almost no evidence at all of fentanyl coming out of Venezuela. Some cocaine comes out of Venezuela, but it doesn't go to the United States. It goes to Europe and Africa, West Africa in particular. And I want to make a point here, because I think the entire effort by the United States in Latin America and in Southeast Asia and elsewhere to interrupt the supply of narcotics is futile. It cannot work. Why? If I spend $1 on Chinese or some other country goods from which I can make fentanyl, let's say I'm a Mexican cartel, I spend $1, it's worth $500 on the street of New York, what I produce. So there's 500 times the profit in buying the precursor. The figure, I think, for cocaine is 300 times. That is what the farmer who does, there is some cocaine produced in Venezuela. As I said, it goes to West Africa and Europe, not to the United States. But if a farmer gets $1, the guy selling the stuff on the street of New York gets $300. So if you have that kind of markup, that kind of profit, there is absolutely no way that you can interrupt the supply. The demand is there. As long as the demand is there, people will supply it. And finally, I just note that there are only 2 instances in history of which I'm aware in which a country has successfully ended an addiction problem. The first was the United States, actually, after our Civil War, 1861-65. Many, many soldiers who were wounded on the battlefield had become addicted to morphine, which is the precursor of heroin. And So in the 1870s, 1880s, we had a crime wave in the United States by people who had to feed their addiction by stealing things for resale so they could have the money to buy drugs. And we rounded up all the addicts and made them go cold turkey, meaning stop the addiction immediately, despite the pain and the suffering, and in some cases death that withdrawal symptoms entail. We also took very vigorous action against the pushers, those who are selling the drugs. The second instance was China, where the British government deliberately addicted, by the 1949, 10 million Chinese were addicted to opium. Opium grown in British India or earlier in Anatolia in Europe and turned and sold in raw form as opium in the Chinese market. The British went to war with the Chinese in order to safeguard their right to sell drugs to the Chinese. Remarkable instance of inverted morality. And the Chinese in 1949 rounded up all 10 million addicts, made them go cold turkey. Many of them died from withdrawal. And they also rounded up the pushers, the people selling the drug, and they cracked down on the criminal gangs that had grown up to supply the opium. So now we have, this is exactly the same situation we have. The demand for drugs, particularly fentanyl, in the United States has fueled an explosion of drug cartels in Mexico. In Mexico, therefore, large parts, particularly of northern Mexico, are under the control of these criminal gangs. And if you go back to the 500 times profit that you can make from something like fentanyl, you can understand why people, why these gangs have the power that they do and the income that they do and the control over Mexican society that they do. But the ultimate cause of this is not the fact that you can make fentanyl, it's the demand for fentanyl in the United States. Many Americans are addicted and many die from overdoses of fentanyl. And it's not, everything Donald Trump is doing is not going to stop this. So the question comes, why is he doing it? Clearly, the drug issue is a pretext. There is no such thing as an enemy combatant because he's a narco-terrorist. This is a completely illegal notion. It is an act of piracy under international law to do what we are doing. So why is he doing it? And the answer is really two things. One is the foreign policy rationale is if Venezuela can be brought down, the Maduro regime can be overthrown. Because that regime is close to the Cuban regime, the Cuban system will also collapse. That's the reasoning. I'm not sure that that is correct, but that is the rationale. But there's an even more important issue here, and that is that the Trump administration has a very anti-immigrant policy. We see ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, violating the constitutional rights of all sorts of people in the United States, citizens and immigrants alike. And this is very unpopular in many places, including in South Florida, where Marco Rubio is from, where there are many Latin American migrants, some from Brazil, many from Venezuela, many from huge numbers from Cuba, some from Nicaragua, some from other countries in Central America, Ecuador, Peru, so on and so forth, Bolivia. And so in order to combat his unpopularity, he is appealing to the Latinos' sense of anti-Maduro, anti-communism, anti-Cuban sentiment. And so this is a political maneuver, which has to do, it has its roots in American domestic politics, or at least that's my view.
Ambassador, Maduro and his government is they really want to talk with the United States and the Trump administration to make things better, to improve the relationship, or maybe. But it seems that the Trump administration has decided that there is no way of communicating with the government in Venezuela. And here is what Maduro himself said on video that CNN published it.
What is your message to the people of the United States, President?
To unite for the peace of the continent. No more endless wars, no more unjust wars, no more Libya, no more Afghanistan.
Do you have a message for President Trump?
My message is yes, peace. Yes, peace.
He literally doesn't want any sort of fight or war, any of that sort, and any sort of conflict with the United States.
Well, yeah, and I think there's quite a history here, of course. And incidentally, when you asked the question, or you pointed out that the British have suspended intelligence sharing with the United States about Venezuela and about the Caribbean basin, I should have reminded your listeners that there's a long history of conflict between the United States and Britain over Venezuela. At the end of the 19th century, the United States almost went to war with Britain over the border between Guyana and Venezuela, and over the British intention to intervene militarily in Venezuela to collect debts on which the Venezuelan government had defaulted. And the United States firmly warned the British that if they did that, they would be at war with the United States. And the British considered the implications of that, which in their view included the loss of Canada. Again, we come back to Mr. Trump and his 51st state idea, I guess. They concluded that it would be far better to appease the United States than to oppose it. And they withdrew their threats to Venezuela. So there's a long history here. I think it's fair to say that there are, about 8 million Venezuelan refugees scattered all over the Western Hemisphere, some in Europe too, but mainly in South America. Some in Nicaragua, apparently quite influential in the government there, but and not in a good way. And there are Venezuelan gangs operating, of course, that is true. But 8 million Venezuelan refugees, and why are they refugees? First of all, they're refugees because the United States has been trying to make Venezuela miserable with sanctions and other measures against Chavismo, the Hugo Chavez Frias government, and now Nicolas Maduro. And second, because the Venezuelan government has not been very competent. And that is why these two the combination of Venezuelan misery, of those people who have not left, very unhappy, many of them, for these two reasons, American hostility and regime change operations, and second, incompetent government. This is why some Venezuelans actually would welcome an American intervention. I think that's very foolish on their part. It would be a devastating war. But the United States has miscalculated many times on Venezuela. And not so long ago, there was, in the Kennedy era in 1962, there was the Bahía de Cochinos, the Bay of Pigs, in Cuba. Well, there was an attempt that was called the Bay of Piglets in Venezuela, where some CIA-sponsored American veterans who had been training Venezuelans to overthrow the government attempted to do so, found themselves tied up and on television in Venezuela, and it was a great embarrassment. And why did this happen? Because some people in the United States, and I don't think this includes the intelligence agencies, I think this is freelance anti-Venezuelan operatives, think that the Venezuelan people are desperate to overthrow the Maduro government. And the reason you cannot believe that is, first of all, Venezuela has a 200,000 man army, which is loyal to Maduro. But second, he has armed 4.5 million militia members to resist an American attack. They have weapons. If they wanted to overthrow their government, they could do it. And apparently they, much as they may dislike their government, many of them, they're not prepared to be unpatriotic and to overthrow that government. So this is a complex situation. And what Marco Rubio said was actually quite ridiculous, and it missed the point. The Europeans are true to international law on this issue. I don't have much respect for them generally because of their failure to follow international law when it comes to things like the genocide in Gaza or to consider a peace program for Ukraine.